I just bought it on kind of a whim without really thinking about it, and I'm really glad I did, because I hate it when that happens. So yeah, basically there's a girl called Alias who lives in Ireland in a fairly small town, and we meet her as she's kind of struggling to get a job. She wants to be an accountant, I believe, but there's not really any work for her in Ireland. So anyway, she has a mother and a sister who she's quite close to, and her sister has kind of, through a connection series, which is The Bat, and work my way through from there, because I find thrillers, crime novels, I mean, generally they're not that long compared to some other books, and generally they are fairly fast reading, so I don't think there's like a huge detriment to me going back and reading like the 4 or 5 books beforehand. I feel like it will help build the characters up and learn about their back history as well. So yeah, The Bat itself takes place in Sydney. So the premise is there has been a murder, quite a brutal murder, and the victim is, I think she was Norwegian. I hope I've got the country right. So essentially this detective comes from Norway, our main character Harry, and he is helping out the local police force to try and solve the crime, and it transpires that they figure out that this is not an isolated case, and actually it's a part of a serial killer who has been doing this to other girls. And so essentially, yeah, you know the deal, it's a crime book. I did find it interesting in a way. The character Harry is very flawed, and he's not your typical kind of grizzled detective, and he's not that kind of amazing detective like a Sherlock or someone that's got this amazing brain power and logic to him. He's just like a very flawed policeman who in the course of this story makes some terrible decisions. At times I was literally almost like shouting at him in my head, like, what are you doing? He has a lot of past issues, traumas, addiction, etc. So yeah, very messy, and he brings all that baggage with him, and yeah, makes a lot of mistakes, but I would say he's not unlikable. I guess he's kind of real in a way, very flawed, but yeah, ultimately there were some things in this book that were so unbelievable in terms of the decisions that the police force were making and the things that they were allowing to happen. Like someone who isn't part of the police force, who basically Harry barely knows, being allowed to go undercover essentially at some point in the book, and you're like, this would never happen. I'm sure even, I don't know when it was set, I don't think it was that old, so that kind of was a bit a 10 out of 10, but maybe logically I could go back to maybe a 9 out of 10. But I expected this to be just a historical romance novel. Like that would be kind of it, and that is really just based on the movie posters that maybe I saw, just the general vibe that I got from the movie trailers. I never actually saw it, but I just thought Captain Corelli's Mandolin is just going to be like a sad love story basically, but this book is so much more, and so well crafted and written. I mean, Captain Corelli doesn't even come into it until about 200 pages, so that romance, although it's an important part of the plot, is absolutely not the only thing about this book. So I'm going to read the back of this one for you. It is 1941 and Captain Antonio Corelli, a young Italian officer, is posted to the Greek island of Kefalonia as part of the occupying forces. At first he is ostracized by the locals, but over time he proves himself to be civilized, humorous, and a consummate musician. When Pelagia, the local doctor's daughter, finds her letters to her fiancé go unanswered, Antonio and Pelagia draw closer, and the working of the eternal triangle seems inevitable. But can this fragile love survive as a war of bestial savagery edges nearer and the lines between invader and defender are blurred? Again, I think at least the back on that one doesn't literally tell you everything that happens, but I think that it kind of, again, undersells what this book is, which is a tapestry of characters and unravelling the story of their lives, the impact of war, living in this beautiful village in Greece, and just so many amazing things. It's basically really Pelagia. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It could be Pelagia. I don't know. Anyway, it's really about her and her father as well, the doctor. I love him so much. He's probably my favourite character. So we see a lot of them before the war, during the war, and everything that happens around that. But yeah, one of the things that struck me so much about this book that I didn't expect was it made me feel so deeply, but both in terms of the kind of beauty of humanity and the horrors and the disturbing side of humanity. And it's a book that, I think it says it somewhere, yeah, comedy and tragedy. This is an absolute pinnacle of comic tragedy, because not only did this book make me laugh out loud on many occasions, and that's super rare for me. I don't normally sit on my own and laugh out loud to a book. I might find it amusing, whatever, but it actually made me laugh out loud. But it also made me cry like a baby. So the fact that a book can elicit those emotions and those feelings in you is, for a start, amazing. But yeah, it kind of took me a bit by surprise. I completely lost what I was saying because I helicoptered some of the key communist like band leaders, for example. So you had the, fascism and communism, in theory, completely opposite sides of the spectrum, but all the kind of horrors that they both can bring about, and the way that it literally had them back to back, I thought was really clever. What else did I want to say? I thought that the characters were so well portrayed, and ones that you really had a reaction to, whether it was good or bad. There was no bland characters in this. Everyone was just incredibly well written and deep and well developed, and even some of the character progressions, how you felt about them at the beginnings of the book versus the end, was so extreme, and again kind of showing the impacts of war in that sense. I can't really say enough good things about this book. I loved it. I loved it so much, and I definitely recommend it. There are a couple of little negatives that's kind of what prevents me from giving it a full 10 out of 10, and I know these are points that, having looked through some of the reviews on Goodreads, I think this is a book where you tend to either give it like a 5-star or a 1-star, because I'm obviously not going to spoil anything, but something that happens towards the end I think is highly frustrating for many people, and I also was not that happy with the decision that the author made in terms of the characters and what happens. Very frustrating moment that it's kind of hard to believe that would have happened that way, and annoying. So yeah, I don't think that necessarily needed to be done. I feel like some alternative needed to happen. But then again, I think the fact that this book isn't perfect kind of is almost fitting for what it's talking about generally in terms of its themes. So yeah, that was the one thing. Another thing that kind of niggled at me was it felt like an inconsistency in a little one tiny section of the timeline. It was honestly about a week, if that, where a couple of key things happened, but I really didn't see it all adding up. Again, it's so vague because I can't be more specific, so that was kind of annoying. And then there is a vast change of pace in terms of the writing towards the end. I think it's the last 100 pages or so. It goes from this like real deep, gorgeous kind of writing, and taking a lot of time over everything, to speeding through quite a lot of events, and some of them feeling like major things that happen, that don't necessarily get a lot of attention. But I was kind of okay with that, because if he'd have gone into all of that stuff in major detail, then it would be War and Peace. I mean, this is like 500 pages already, maybe even a bit longer. So if he'd have gone into the rest of that stuff, then it would have been a massive book. And I think we needed to hear about it as well. So I think it would have been unsatisfying if that stuff wasn't included. So in my head, I basically read that as like a very, very, very long epilogue, which kind of allowed me to adjust to the change in pace and the level of detail that we were getting. But yeah, like I said, it's such an extreme reaction to this book. So many heartbreaking moments, so many beautiful moments, and I just think it's such a good book. And yeah, I know some people really dislike the ending, but I was okay with it ultimately. And I'm so happy that I read it. So happy that I read it, because it's a book that I just thinking it was some generic romance, and it's just so much more than that, and I feel like I haven't even necessarily done it justice, and that there's probably loads more stuff that I wanted to talk about. But yeah, I think one of the reasons that I picked this up when I saw it was one of my friends read a non-fiction, I think it was non-fiction work that he written about Simon Bolivar, and she'd said that that was really well written. So yeah, it kind of made me think, oh, maybe I'll pick this up. But yeah, I was kind of expecting, based on the name and the fact that he obviously writes about Mediterranean or South American, I thought that maybe he was gonna be French or Spanish or Italian or something, but he's British, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit disappointed. I know that's so stupid, but yeah, I was a bit disappointed to find out it made it feel a little bit less magical somehow. But yeah, a really, really good book. I have actually I've bent some corners down, so I will read. I did say I was wrapping this up, but let me try and remember what I was gonna read out. Oh yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the beauty of the way that it's written, and the kind of stuff like entwined with like really heavy hitting subject matter. And I don't think this is spoilerish because there's no names or anything. It is towards the end of the book though, so if you didn't want to hit any of it, then you can obviously skip ahead. And like I said, not telling you who this is talking about at all. It could be any number of characters. It did not occur to him that he was a statistic, one more life warped and ruined by a war, a tarnished hero destined for the void. He was aware of nothing but a vanishment of paradise, an optimism that had turned to dust and ash, a joy that had once shone brighter than the summer sun, but now had disappeared and melted into the black light and frigid heat of massacre and cumulative remorse. He had struggled for a better world and wrecked it, which is just so powerful and beautifully written. Okay, actually I'm not going to read any other bits just in case of kind of spoilerish stuff, but trust me, this is so well written and beautiful, and if you're vaguely into this kind of thing, I would definitely recommend it. After finishing Captain Corelli's mandolin, I had to take a bit of a break, which was only a few days in reality, but it was the kind of book where you just had to sit with it. You almost had to recover from the emotion that you kind of poured into the reading of it, and sit and think about what had happened. And then even then I was like, I can't go into anything serious in any way, and so I picked up The Vanishing Cherry Blossom Bookshop. The Vanishing Cherry Blossom Bookshop by Takuya Asakura. And I basically bought this to go on my springtime display because it is a beautiful book cover with obviously the cherry blossom. And that's the back of it as well, and it's kind of a bit sparkly. So I bought this mainly for aesthetic vibes. Like, I was planning to read it, but this seemed the perfect antidote to finishing and feeling bereaved by finishing Captain Corelli's mandolin. So it's kind of a cute, cozy-ish book with maybe not as much substance as many other books, but let's read this one. Welcome to the Cherry Blossom Bookshop, a haven for book lovers that only appears during the fleeting cherry blossom season. Nestled amidst the bloom of delicate petals, you will find a sanctuary for those burdened by regrets and past sorrows. Here, Sakura, the mysterious young owner, and her wise calico cat, Kabako, patiently await the arrival of souls in need of solace and healing. I felt like I was one of those souls after the last book. Told over 4 seasons, each visitor to the bookshop holds a book that bridges their past and present, guiding them towards understanding and acceptance. With the antique charm of the shop and the soothing aroma of freshly brewed coffee, sakura and tobacco help their guests confront their lingering sadness through the power of stories, enabling them to move forward with renewed hope. So, this book is split into 4 parts, 3 main parts with different customers, and then a kind of added bit at the end. And unlike many cute, cozy type books that I have read before, this one actually felt like it did have a bit more substance to it. There was a plot, and in a way they were almost short stories with an overarching kind of headline plot that wove through the whole book, but because it focuses on each of the customers that came in to the bookshop, or essentially get kind of transported to the bookshop, then you get a snapshot of their lives and the kind of things that are troubling them and that they're struggling with in their lives, and then the kind of resolution to that each time. And so it does feel a bit more worthwhile reading than, you know, your other ones honestly, I just found it a bit jarring, and it did detract a little bit from the book for me. Okay, so the author is S.T. Gibson. S.T. Gibson. But yeah, there were some very good things about this book that I enjoyed. I mean, I enjoyed it generally. If I kind of divorced it from Dracula in my mind, I actually did quite enjoy the story. But it's very kind of, I think it's emulating a little bit mention is I did read one more cat story, just the one this month. And again, I hope that I will read a few more this month. I just love these editions so much. I haven't maybe mentioned this before, but even